I will never forget the moment I realized my parents weren't coming to my wedding. I was standing at the back of the church, my heart pounding, a mix of excitement and anxiety swirling in my chest. Soft music filled the air, mingling with the hushed whispers of guests taking their seats. I kept glancing towards the entrance, hoping to see them walk through the doors, but they never appeared. As the ceremony was about to begin, a lump formed in my throat. They had promised they'd be there. We had been planning this day for a year. I'd sent out invitations months in advance, giving everyone, including my parents, plenty of time to prepare. They were supposed to be sitting in the front row, watching their eldest daughter marry the love of her life, Jake. Yet, they were nowhere to be found. I tried to push down the rising panic, telling myself they were stuck in traffic or had a last-minute emergency, but just as I was about to walk down the aisle, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my mom. "Sweetie, we are so sorry, Amanda really needs us here today. We'll see you after the party." I stared at the message in disbelief, trying to process what I had just read. Amanda's surprise party. My sister had thrown a last-minute surprise birthday party for her boyfriend, and my parents had chosen that over my wedding. It felt like a punch to the gut. How could they prioritize a casual party over their own daughter's wedding? Jake noticed my hesitation and the look on my face. I could see the worry in his eyes. He mouthed, "Everything okay?" I managed a weak smile and shoved my phone into my bag. I refused to let this ruin our day. I forced a smile, smoothed down my dress, and walked towards Jake, trying to focus on the love we were celebrating, but deep down, a part of me felt broken. The ceremony itself was beautiful, more than I could have imagined. Jake looked at me with so much love and warmth that, for a moment, I forgot the pain of my parents' absence. Our friends and distant relatives were there, showering us with love and support, but the empty seats in the front row were a constant reminder. By the time the reception rolled around, I was exhausted. Jake, ever the optimist, kept trying to cheer me up, telling me everything was perfect and that our love was all that mattered. He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. My own parents had missed one of the most important days of my life. My sister had chosen her boyfriend's party over me, and they all expected me to be okay with it. I plastered on a smile throughout the evening, responding to toasts and dancing with Jake, pretending I wasn't hurting, but the betrayal gnawed at me. I kept replaying my mom's message in my head. It wasn't even an apology, just a casual explanation, as if attending Amanda's party was the most natural thing in the world, as if my wedding wasn't their priority. A few friends who had noticed their absence asked where my parents were, and each time, I just shrugged and said they had other commitments, but I knew everyone could sense something was off. My heart ached every time the subject came up, and by the end of the night, I felt more conflicted than ever. Jake and I were surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us, but the void left by my parents and sister was undeniable. No matter how hard I tried to push the pain aside, I couldn't. I had always been the easygoing one, quick to forgive, but this felt different. This cut deeper, and the message was clear: they hadn't prioritized my wedding, they hadn't prioritized me. As Jake and I walked hand in hand out of the venue that night, I realized something inside me had shifted. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive them. It wasn't just that they had missed my wedding, it was the blatant disregard for my feelings and the knowledge that Amanda's boyfriend's party had been more important than the start of my marriage that caused me immeasurable pain. Back at the hotel, I knew things would change. I wasn't sure what kind of relationship I could have with my parents or sister going forward, but I knew one thing for sure: I needed to set boundaries. They had made their choice, and now I needed to make mine. What I didn't realize at the time was how deep this rift would become and just how much worse things would get in the days that followed. I held on to the hope that maybe my parents would realize their mistake, maybe they would call and apologize and say they regretted not being there, but that never happened. Instead, I received a short and infuriating message from my mom: "Hope you had fun. Amanda's party was a huge success. Can't wait to see the wedding photos." That was it. No remorse, no acknowledgement of the fact that they had missed one of the most important days of my life to attend Amanda's boyfriend's party. It felt like another blow. I stared at my phone, wondering how they could be so insensitive. I had naively hoped they would at least ask how the wedding went, but instead, they were gushing about Amanda's party as if it were some great achievement. I was angry, hurt, and utterly exhausted. What was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life was now overshadowed by this overwhelming sense of betrayal. I knew I couldn't hold these feelings in, so I called my Aunt Lisa. Aunt Lisa had always been a steady presence in my life. She and my Uncle Rob were considered the black sheep of the family, never quite fitting into my parents' rigid, self-absorbed lifestyle. They had warned me for years about my parents' favoritism towards Amanda, but I had never wanted to believe it. Now, it was impossible to ignore. When Lisa answered the phone, I could barely contain my frustration. They didn't come, Lisa, I said, my voice choked with emotion. They went to Amanda's party instead. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her shaking her head. Oh, honey, she finally said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm so sorry, but I'm not surprised. I've been telling you for years that you're not their priority. It stung to hear those words, even though I knew she was right. It felt like a knife twisting deeper in the wound. How could they? How could they act like it's no big deal? I'm their daughter. They've always put Amanda on a pedestal, Lisa replied, not unkindly, and you've always been the easy one, the one who doesn't make waves. But you can't let them sweep this under the rug this time. She was right, I couldn't. For years, I had bent over backwards to be the dutiful daughter. I avoided conflict, let things slide, and tried not to rock the boat, but this was different. This wasn't just about being overlooked over something trivial, this was my wedding, and they had chosen Amanda's boyfriend's birthday party over me. After I hung up with Lisa, I felt a mix of hurt and sadness. It was like something inside me had finally snapped. I could no longer ignore the truth. I wasn't their priority, and maybe I never had been. Jake, who had been listening quietly from the other side of the room, came over and put his arms around me. You don't have to take this anymore, he said softly, his voice steady. You deserve better. We're starting a new life together, and that's what matters. His words gave me the strength I needed. I knew I had to set boundaries. I wasn't going to beg for my parents' attention anymore. If they weren't willing to make the effort to be there for me on my wedding day, then they didn't deserve to be a part of my life. I didn't cut them off completely, I didn't block them or do anything dramatic like that, but I did something I had never done before. I stopped reaching out. I didn't call them, I didn't visit them, I didn't even send them wedding photos. I figured if they cared enough, they would reach out to me. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Weeks turned into months, and I heard nothing from them. No follow-up texts, no phone calls checking in, no attempts to make amends. Amanda, of course, posted all about the grand party she had thrown on social media, and my parents liked and commented on every single post. It hurt, but it also gave me clarity. They had made their choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. I wasn't going to chase after them, hoping they would care about me the way they cared about Amanda. I had Jake, I had my aunt and uncle who were always there for me, and that was enough. But I still couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for my parents to realize what they had lost, or if they ever would. Not long after the wedding, something unexpected happened. Jake and I were invited to dinner at Aunt Lisa and Uncle Rob's house. This wasn't unusual, we often escaped to their place on weekends, seeking refuge in their warm, drama-free company. But this time, there was a different air about it, a sense of seriousness. Dinner started out normally enough. Lisa and Rob chatted about their latest gardening projects. Jake asked Rob about his woodworking hobby, but midway through the meal, I noticed Lisa and Rob exchange a look. She cleared her throat, and her expression softened as she turned to me. We've been doing some thinking about what happened at your wedding, she said carefully. I immediately tensed up, wanting to put the whole thing behind me, especially in such a peaceful setting, but before I could speak, Lisa continued, Rob and I wanted you to know that we've made some decisions regarding our estate. I blinked, confused. Your estate? I repeated, unsure where she was going with this. Rob nodded. We don't have children of our own, and we've always thought of you as our own. After what your parents did, missing your wedding, choosing Amanda's party, we decided it was time to make things clear. I still couldn't quite grasp what they were saying. They couldn't possibly mean what I thought they meant. Lisa leaned forward, clasping her hands together. We've updated our will, and we're leaving everything to you and Jake. My mouth went dry. Everything? They both nodded. Rob's voice was calm and steady as he added, We've been thinking about this for a long time. We know your relationship with your parents has always been complicated, and after they treated you like that, we wanted you to understand how much you mean to us. You deserve to be treated like family. I was stunned. My aunt and uncle had always been generous, always made me feel like I belonged in their lives, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Lisa and Rob weren't incredibly wealthy, but they lived comfortably. I knew their estate, while not extravagant, would provide a secure future for Jake and me. The fact that they were choosing to leave it all to us left me speechless. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I couldn't find the right words. I don't know what to say. Thank you, but you don't have to do this. Lisa reached out and gently took my hand. We want to. This isn't about the money, it's about making sure you know we love you. Your parents have made their choices, and we're making ours. Jake, who was sitting beside me, squeezed my hand under the table, his silent support making my emotions even more overwhelming. A lump formed in my throat. I had spent so much time feeling like an afterthought in my own family, always coming second to Amanda, but now Lisa and Rob were reminding me that I mattered. I wasn't just the easygoing daughter who never complained, I was important to them, I was loved. "We just want you to know," Lisa continued, her voice filled with warmth, "that you're not alone. You'll never be alone." Their words hit me hard, filling me with a deep sense of gratitude and a validation I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel invisible, I felt seen, valued for who I was, not as an extension of someone else. After dinner, as Jake and I drove home, I was quiet, still processing everything that had happened. Jake looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" he asked gently, squeezing my hand. "Yeah," I said softly. I never expected that." "Lisa and Rob love you," Jake said with a smile. "They always have. This just proves it." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. I hadn't told my parents or Amanda about the dinner yet. I wasn't sure how they would react, but deep down, I knew that once this news got out, it would create a seismic shift in my family. It wasn't just about the inheritance, it was about Lisa and Rob drawing a line in the sand between their loyalty to me and my parents' long-standing, blatant disregard. For so long, I had played the role of peacemaker, the one who let things slide, the one who didn't demand attention, but this turn of events, this unexpected act of love from my aunt and uncle, was a reminder that I didn't have to fight for scraps of affection anymore. What I didn't anticipate was that this decision would ignite something in my parents, a sudden desperation to make amends that would only reveal their true intentions. The news reached my parents quickly. I'm still not sure how they found out about the inheritance. Maybe Amanda overheard something, or maybe a distant cousin let it slip, but within days, my phone was bombarded with texts and missed calls from my mom. At first, I ignored them. After months of silence, her reaching out now, for such an obvious reason, made me not want to deal with the inevitable guilt trip and half-hearted apologies I knew were coming. But curiosity got the better of me, and I eventually answered the phone, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. "Mom," I said cautiously, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. "Honey," she gushed, her voice dripping with false sweetness, which I instantly recognized. This wasn't a genuine conversation, it was a performance. "We've been thinking about what happened at your wedding, and we really want to make it up to you." I almost laughed. Now she wanted to make it up to me? After months of barely acknowledging me, leaving me to deal with the fallout of their betrayal on my own, now there was a sudden urge for reconciliation. I remained silent, letting her dig herself deeper. "We know we made a mistake," she continued, her tone shifting to a carefully rehearsed regret. "Missing the ceremony. Well, it just wasn't right, but your father and I. We were thinking. Maybe we could have a do-over wedding, a real family celebration, so we can be there this time." I nearly dropped my phone. A do-over wedding? As if I would redo the whole thing just to make them feel better. "Absolutely not," I interrupted sharply, cutting her off before she could say anything more. My patience had run out. "You missed my wedding because you chose Amanda's surprise party. That was more important to you. That was your choice." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could feel her scrambling for a response. When she finally spoke again, the fake sweetness was gone, replaced by something more calculating. "We just want a chance to make things right," she said, but there was no warmth in her words. "And, I've heard about Lisa and Rob's decision. Don't you think they would want the whole family to be together?" There it was. The real reason for her sudden change of heart. This wasn't about making amends, it was about the money. They didn't care about my wedding, they didn't care about how they had hurt me, but the moment they found out Lisa and Rob were leaving their entire estate to me, they were suddenly desperate for reconciliation. "You're kidding me," I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. "This isn't about making things right, is it? This is about the money. You just don't want to lose out on it." "Of course not," my mom retorted, clearly annoyed that I had seen through her facade. "It's nothing like that. We're family. Family should stick together." "No, Mom," I said firmly, my voice cold. "You made your choice when you missed my wedding for Amanda's party. You showed me where I stand with you. And now, because there's money involved, you suddenly want to be a family again. I'm not buying it." Her voice turned desperate. "But don't you think it would be better for everyone if we could just put this behind us? Lisa and Rob wouldn't want us to be divided like this. We're your parents. You can't just shut us out over one mistake." "One mistake?" I repeated incredulously. "It's not just about the wedding. It's about years of this, always putting Amanda first, always treating me like an afterthought. This inheritance doesn't change anything between us." I could hear her scrambling, trying to come up with something, anything, that would sway me, but I was done. I had spent my entire life trying to please them, trying to be good enough, but they had shown their true colors, and I wasn't going to compromise just because they were afraid of a financial loss. "We're done here, Mom," I said, ending the conversation abruptly. "If you're reaching out because you genuinely feel bad about what happened, then fine, but if this is about the inheritance, then you can forget it." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest, but I felt a strange sense of relief. At least this time, I hadn't succumbed to their manipulation, I had stood my ground. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, wondering if I had done the right thing, but deep down, I knew I had. They had made their choices, and I had to make mine. As I sat alone in the quiet apartment, Jake came over and put his arms around me. "You did the right thing," he whispered, sensing the emotional turmoil I was going through. "I hope so," I sighed, leaning into him. I don't know what's going to happen next." "What's going to happen next is that we're going to live our lives our way," Jake said with a reassuring smile. That night, lying in bed, I realized that this was the first time I had truly set a boundary with my parents, and it felt good, even amidst the turmoil. I knew I had made the right decision, but I also knew that this wasn't over. They wouldn't take this lightly, especially with the inheritance hanging in the balance. There was more to come, more drama waiting in the wings, but for now, I had drawn my line, and I wouldn't let them cross it. Over the next few weeks, the messages kept coming. My mom, who had barely made an effort to contact me after the wedding, now suddenly had all the time in the world to send me lengthy, emotional texts, each one dripping with regret and veiled guilt trips, trying to tug at my heartstrings. "I think about your wedding every day. We made a mistake, sweetheart, but families forgive each other, right? I just want us to move forward. Please let me make it up to you." I read the messages, my stomach churning. There was a time when I would have jumped at the chance to mend fences, to smooth things over, but that time was gone. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about a lifetime of feeling like an afterthought to them. The voicemails from my dad weren't much better. He wasn't a man of many words, so hearing him say how much he missed me was jarring. His messages sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind his sudden concern. "I just want us to be a family again, kiddo. We miss you. Let's just put everything behind us. Your mom and I want to be a part of your life." A part of me wanted to believe him, but I knew in my heart that if they truly cared, they wouldn't have waited until there was something to lose to reach out. Amanda, of course, was relentless in her own way. She sent text after text, all filled with the same shallow attempts at reconnection. Her tone was breezy, as if this whole thing was just a minor hiccup. She acted as if my feelings were just a phase I needed to get over. "Come on, sis, we're family. We have to stick together. I know you're upset, but Mom and Dad really want to make it up to you. You should just let it go." Amanda's words rang hollow. The same sister who had stolen the spotlight on my wedding day was now acting like I was the one causing trouble. As always, her focus was on maintaining the status quo, ensuring she remained the center of attention while the rest of us fell in line. I tried to ignore it all, but the constant barrage of messages made it impossible. I could feel the guilt they were trying to impose on me, wrapping around my heart like a heavy chain. My mother's pleas, my father's voicemails, Amanda's insistence, they were all pushing me to my breaking point, urging me to cave under the weight of their expectations. But I wouldn't. Not this time. Jake was my rock. Every time I felt myself wavering, he was there to remind me why we had set these boundaries in the first place. "You don't owe them anything," he would say, pulling me close. "You've given them enough chances. It's time to put yourself first." He was right, I did, but knowing it didn't make it easy. There were moments when the guilt would gnaw at me, whispering that I was being too harsh, that maybe they really did want to make amends. But then I would remember the months of silence, the years of coming second to Amanda, and I knew that this wasn't about making amends, it was about control. Their sudden outpouring of affection wasn't because they had finally seen the light, it was because they were afraid of losing Lisa and Rob's inheritance. They were grasping at straws, hoping that if they acted contrite enough, I would give in. But I was done playing their games. The messages continued, but I stopped responding. I needed to focus on my life with Jake, on building a future free from the shadow of my parents' manipulation. Each day was a reminder that setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about choosing my own happiness, on my own terms, not theirs. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others, but with every message I didn't reply to, with every guilt trip I refused to succumb to, I felt a little lighter. Little by little, I was taking back my life, one boundary at a time. I didn't know how far my family would go to break down those walls, but for the first time, I felt ready for whatever came next. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension as we sat there, my parents across from Jake and me. I could see my dad's hands fidgeting nervously, while my mom kept flashing that saccharine smile she used to diffuse conflict. But this wouldn't be an evening of pretense or pleasantries. My mom, never comfortable with silence, tried to break the ice with her usual charm. "Honey, we've missed you so much," she said, rising to give me a hug, but I didn't move. "Sit down," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "We need to talk." The words landed like a lead weight. Her outstretched arms fell awkwardly to her sides, and the smile vanished from her face as she sank back into her seat. I wasn't going to drag this out, there was no point in beating around the bush. "You missed my wedding," I stated bluntly, my voice even and steady, devoid of emotion. "You chose Amanda's party over one of the most important days of my life. That wasn't a mistake, it was a choice." My mother gasped, and my father's head dropped as if he were ashamed of his actions. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding my gaze. We thought Amanda really needed us," my mother stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "And I didn't," I countered, a hint of bitterness creeping into my tone. "It was my wedding, Mom. One of the most important days of my life. You promised you'd be there." Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. I could feel Jake's hand gently resting on mine, offering silent support. "We know we messed up," my father finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "We're really sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't just about the wedding. It's about everything that's happened over the years. It's always been Amanda first, and I've always been an afterthought. I'm done with it." Amanda looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's not fair," she choked out. "You always do this to me. Like I can't do anything right." "This isn't about you, Amanda," I sighed. "This is about boundaries. About respect. About how family should treat each other. You didn't respect me. You didn't prioritize me, and I can't do this anymore." My mother started to cry, covering her face with her hands. "We love you," she sobbed. "We never meant to hurt you." "I know you love me," I said, my voice softening slightly. "But I need you to show it. I need you to respect my feelings, to respect my choices. I need you to treat me like I'm just as important as Amanda." What can we do?" my father asked, his voice laced with desperation. "For starters," I said, "stop making this about me. Stop trying to convince me that I'm overreacting. Admit that you made a mistake and take responsibility for it. And then, start acting like you actually care." I paused, looking at each of them, making sure they understood. "And," I added, "stop bringing up the idea of a second wedding. That's never going to happen." Another silence settled over the room. I could feel the weight of the moment, but this time, I didn't back down. I had said what I needed to say, I had set my boundaries. Now, it was up to them to decide how they would respond. We'll try," my mother finally said, her voice trembling. "We'll try to do better." "I hope so," I said. "Because if things don't change, I can't have any kind of relationship with you." The conversation ended with the air still thick with tension, but I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had finally spoken my truth, I had finally stood up for myself. The next few weeks weren't magically better. My parents and Amanda still texted and called, but there was a noticeable shift in their tone. They stopped trying to manipulate me or make me feel guilty and started actually listening to what I had to say. They began showing more interest in my life, asking about my job and my relationship with Jake. They even started making an effort to spend time with me one-on-one, instead of always lumping me in with Amanda. It was a slow process, and it wasn't easy. There were many times when I wanted to give up, to fall back into old patterns, but I persevered. Because I knew that if I wanted to have a healthy relationship with my family, things had to change. Over time, things did begin to improve. My parents started to genuinely understand the impact of their past behavior, and they made more of an effort to be respectful of my feelings. My relationship with Amanda also became more genuine, we started to connect like real sisters. Of course, it wasn't a fairy tale ending. We still had disagreements and arguments, but now we handled them in a healthier way. We learned to listen to each other, to respect each other's boundaries, and to prioritize each other's feelings. Ultimately, my wedding wasn't ruined by my parents' absence. It remained a significant milestone in my life, a day I would never forget. But more importantly, it became a turning point, a catalyst for me to start standing up for myself and creating a happier, healthier life. I learned to set boundaries, I learned to prioritize myself, and I learned to cherish those who truly loved and supported me. And it all started with that moment I'll never forget, the moment I realized my parents weren't coming to my wedding. A few months later, Jake and I received an invitation from Aunt Lisa and Uncle Rob. They wanted to host a small family gathering to celebrate our marriage. When we arrived at their house, the atmosphere felt lighter and more relaxed than it had in a long time. My parents and Amanda were there too, and they all seemed genuinely happy to be with us. Dinner went smoothly, filled with laughter and easy conversation. I noticed my parents making a conscious effort to include me, asking about my work and my life, and truly listening to my responses. Amanda was also more mature, not vying for attention as she had in the past. After dinner, Aunt Lisa stood up and raised her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to my niece and nephew," she said with a warm smile. "May you have a lifetime of happiness together." Everyone raised their glasses, offering their congratulations. In that moment, a wave of warmth washed over me. I realized that despite everything we had been through, my family was still there, and in some ways, stronger than before. After the gathering, my mother approached me, gently taking my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for giving us another chance." I smiled at her. "Thank you for being willing to change," I replied. I knew we still had a long way to go, but we had taken an important step. We had learned to communicate, to respect each other, and to prioritize each other's feelings. Years later, Jake and I had children of our own. My parents and Amanda were wonderful with them, making up for past mistakes by being loving and supportive grandparents and aunt. I realized that life isn't always perfect, and family relationships are bound to have their ups and downs. But what matters is how we navigate those challenges, how we learn from our mistakes, and how we mend the rifts with love and understanding. I'll never forget the moment I realized my parents weren't coming to my wedding. It was a painful moment, but it was also a pivotal one. It made me realize that I needed to stand up for myself, that I needed to set boundaries, that I needed to choose my own happiness. And ultimately, it led me to a stronger, healthier family, one filled with love and support. That's the ending of my story, a story of love, loss, growth, and redemption.